In this video, you are going to figure out whether your business has a clear core or whether it's slowly expanding in too many directions. Because a lot of businesses keep growing, making money, but start feeling heavier instead of clearer. New clients get added, new services get layered in, new opportunities get accepted. And over time, effort spreads out instead of compounding. By the end of this, you'll know what your business is actually built around and whether your growth is strengthening a center or drifting away from one. If we haven't met properly, my name is Liban, Ask Libs, and we build and structure businesses. And I've worked with a mentor who's taught me everything I know about business. I've been around many rooms and have acquired knowledge from many mentors, and I'm here today to show you everything. Many businesses begin clearly and gradually become diffuse. Revenue can be strong, clients can be satisfied, opportunities can continue arriving, and yet the business begins to feel heavier than it should. Not unstable, not failing, just heavier. And often that weight comes from something subtle, a lack of defined center. On the surface, most founders can describe what they do. You have an industry, a general service, a category you fit into. From the outside, it appears clear, but operational clarity is different from surface clarity. Operational clarity answers questions like, what is the primary offer? Who is the primary client? What type of work generates the most consistent revenue? What activity drives the majority of growth? Where does the business actually make its money? And over time, those answers can become less obvious. Not because something went wrong, but because responsiveness expands the edges. Businesses often grow by saying yes. A client asks something slightly outside the core offer, you accommodate it. A new opportunity appears that seems aligned enough, you explore it. A different type of client becomes available, you accept it. Each decision makes sense in isolation. Each opportunity adds revenue. Each expansion feels reasonable. But over time, the shape of the business shifts, not dramatically, gradually. Complexity increases invisibly. And what once felt like a single clear offering becomes multiple variations. What once felt like a client profile becomes several. What once felt cohesive becomes adaptive. And adaptation, when not defined carefully, begins to distribute effort. Instead of effort compounding in one direction, it spreads across several. Instead of depth increasing around the center, activity expands outward. From the outside, this looks like versatility, and versatility can become valuable. But internally, the fusion creates weight, because each variation requires context. Each client type requires a slightly different messaging. Each offer variation requires slightly different delivery. Each new opportunity introduces additional coordination. None of this feels dramatic at first. The business continues moving. Revenue may even increase, but cognitive load rises quietly. Decision-making becomes more complex, marketing becomes less focused, and delivery becomes more varied. Effort distributes instead of compounding. And when effort distributes, progress feels slower. Even if revenue remains steady, that is often the moment of confusion. The business is working, but it does not feel coherent. Growth exists, but it does not feel aligned. The question then is not whether the business is viable. It is whether the business has a defined center. Because coherence reduces weight, diffusion increases it, and without a defined center of gravity, the business becomes harder to direct. Not because the founder lacks discipline, but because the direction itself is unclear. Now, the solution to diffusion is not reinvention, it's recognition. Most businesses already have a center of gravity, it just hasn't been defined clearly. Instead of asking, what could we become? The better question is, what in practice is this business already built around? Over time, patterns emerge. Certain offers generate the majority of revenue. Certain client types return more consistently. Certain activities drive disproportionate results. Certain forms of work feel more aligned and easier to execute. But when everything is treated equally, those patterns become blurred. Revenue streams can appear equal when they are not. Opportunities can feel equally important when they are not. And without clarity, effort distributes evenly, even when results do not. Now, every business has a core, not necessarily a single product, not necessarily a single client, but a central mechanism that drives the majority of consistent revenue. Around it sit additional offers, variations, supporting services, occasional projects, new experiments. None of these are inherently wrong, but they do not all carry equal structural weight. The core revenue engine is the activity that, if strengthened, increases stability most directly. It is the offer that, when refined, compounds. The client type that, when served repeatedly, creates clarity. The process that, when improved, makes everything else easier. The problem is not that the surrounding activities exist. The problem is when they compete with the core for attention. When the center is undefined, everything feels equally urgent. Delivery becomes more varied than necessary, and each opportunity is evaluated in isolation rather than relative to a center. Recognition changes that dynamic immediately. You can see which activities support the center and which distract from it. You can evaluate new opportunities based on alignment rather than excitement. You can ask, does this strengthen the center, or does it pull away from it? Does this deepen what we already do well, or does it introduce a new direction entirely? Without a defined center, growth feels like expansion. With a defined center, growth becomes concentration. Effort compounds rather than it distributing. Clarity sharpens rather than broadens, and that shift reduces weight because direction is no longer ambiguous. The business is no longer trying to be everything at once. It is strengthening what already works. The psychological shift here is subtle, but it is powerful. When the core is unclear, every opportunity feels necessary. When the core is recognized, many opportunities become optional. And optional decisions are lighter than necessary ones. You begin to see that not every revenue source deserves equal attention. Not every client type deserves equal focus. Not every service variation deserves equal energy. The business does not shrink. It becomes defined, and definition reduces internal friction because coherence returns. Now, once the core revenue engine is recognized, the next step is not reduction, it is alignment. Simplification is often misunderstood, however. It is not about doing less for the sake of doing less. It is about organizing effort around what already works. When the center is defined clearly, the rest of the business can be structured in relation to it, not competing with it, not distracting with it. It is supporting it. These are three elements that bring coherence back into place. You have your primary client, primary offer, and supporting activities. The primary client is the type of client that most consistently aligns with the core revenue engine, not the occasional outlier, not the experimental market, the one that returns, the one that converts, the one that fits naturally with how the business already operates. The primary offer is the mechanism through which the client has served, the service or product that drives the majority of reliable revenue, not necessarily the highest ticket, not necessarily the newest, but the most structurally central. Supporting activities are everything else. Marketing channels, secondary services, adjacent opportunities, experiments. These are not eliminated. They are positioned correctly. They become peripheral rather than competing. When these elements are not clearly defined, effort distributes. Marketing speaks to multiple audiences at once. Offers multiply slightly over time. Delivery becomes varied in ways that increases coordination. Each variation adds a small layer of cognitive load. When they are aligned, something shifts. Marketing sharpens. Delivery standardizes where appropriate. Decision-making accelerates because each new opportunity can be evaluated through a simple filter. Does this support the primary client and primary offer? Or does it introduce a new direction? Alignment replaces distribution. Effort compounds instead of spreading. Cognitive load reduces because fewer variables are competing for priority. The business feels lighter, not because it is smaller, but because it is coherent. Coherence reduces internal friction. Friction is often mistaken for workload, but much of it comes from ambiguity. When client, offer, and activity are all aligned, ambiguity decreases. The business begins to move in one direction rather than several, and movement in one direction creates depth. Depth creates expertise. Expertise creates efficiency. Efficiency creates margin, and margin reduces pressure. This is not about narrowing potential. It is about strengthening the center so everything else becomes clearer. When the center is strong, peripheral opportunities can be added deliberately. When the center is weak, peripheral opportunities create weight. Alignment is what restores stability. Now, when the center of the business is undefined, ambiguity becomes normal. Every opportunity feels potentially important. Every client feels equally valuable. Every offer variation feels necessary. And because everything feels relevant, decisions feel heavier than they should. Not because the options are bad, but because the direction is unclear. When the center is defined, ambiguity reduces immediately. You know what the business is built around. You know which client matters most. You know which office carries more structural weight. The clarity changes how decisions feel. New opportunities are evaluated relative to the center, not in isolation. Marketing becomes sharper. Delivery becomes more repeatable. Effort begins to compound instead of distribute. And when effort compounds, progress feels proportional. The business no longer feels like it's expanding in multiple directions at once. It feels coherent. Coherence is stability, not in the sense of eliminating change, but in the sense of giving change a reference point. A coherent business is not rigid. It is just organized. It can adapt deliberately rather than reactively. It can expand from a center rather than drift away from one. The difference is subtle, but it is significant because when direction is defined, growth becomes calmer, not because complexity disappears, but because complexity is aligned. You are no longer asking, what should we become? You are strengthening what already works. And that shift removes internal friction. The business becomes easier to think about, easier to explain, easier to prioritize, not because it is smaller, but because it is clear. And clarity is what turns movement into momentum. So that's the end of it. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.